Professor Raymond Ellis was one of those teachers everyone feared but secretly admired. He was known across the university for his sharp mind and even sharper tongue. His classes were never easy, not because the subject was hard, but because he was. He demanded perfection from his students, never tolerated mistakes, and often embarrassed anyone who couldn't keep up. He believed knowledge belonged only to those who worked hard and came from privilege. To him, intelligence was a gift reserved for the upper class, not for people who cleaned floors or served coffee. Every morning, Professor Ellis would arrive at the university in his expensive gray suit, polished shoes, and with a pile of books under his arm. His office was always spotless because Mrs. Hannah, the new maid, made sure of it. She was quiet, respectful, and always greeted him with a polite smile. She never spoke much, and he never cared to ask anything about her. To him, she was just another face in the background, invisible like many others who worked behind the scenes. But there was someone who often caught his eye. A little girl who waited for Mrs. Hannah in the hallway every afternoon. Her name was Aiko. She couldn't have been more than 15, yet she always sat quietly with a small notebook in her hands. While other kids scrolled through phones or chatted loudly, Aiko read or scribbled something on paper. Sometimes she'd whisper words softly to herself, practicing their sounds. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity, though she never tried to get anyone's attention. One day, Professor Ellis walked past her and noticed her writing. He paused for a moment, curiosity getting the better of him. "What are you writing, young lady?" he asked in his usual cold tone. Aiko looked up shyly and said, "Just some words I'm learning." He raised an eyebrow. "Words you're learning? In English?" he asked, half smiling with amusement. She nodded. "And some other languages too." The professor couldn't help but laugh. "Other languages?" he repeated mockingly. "You mean you're learning languages on your own?" Aiko nodded again, her face innocent and calm. She didn't seem offended by his tone, just quietly confident. But her confidence irritated him. He had spent decades mastering languages. Latin, Japanese, Mandarin, French, German. And this little girl thought she could do the same by herself? Impossible. He crossed his arms. "Tell me, can you even write in Japanese?" Aiko hesitated, not because she didn't know, but because she wasn't sure if she should answer. "A little," she said softly. The professor smirked. "A little? Then show me. Write this sentence." He grabbed a piece of paper from his desk and quickly wrote a phrase in English. "Knowledge is power." Then he slid it toward her. "Let's see how much you really know." The students standing nearby giggled quietly. They loved when the professor teased people. It made them feel safe because at least for that moment his attention wasn't on them. Aiko took the paper carefully. Her small hands didn't tremble. She studied the sentence for a second, then picked up a pen. In less than a minute, she wrote the perfect Japanese translation in graceful, flowing characters. Every stroke was elegant and accurate. When she handed it back, Professor Ellis stared at it. His smile faded. He blinked, reading it again just to be sure. The grammar, the kanji, everything was flawless. "Where did you learn this?" he asked, his tone suddenly serious. "From books," Aiko replied. "Old ones my mother found while cleaning." He frowned. "You taught yourself?" She nodded again. "Yes, I like how languages sound. They make me feel like I'm in another world." The professor didn't say anything for a moment. His pride wouldn't allow him to admit he was impressed, but deep down something stirred, curiosity, maybe even respect. Still, he couldn't show it. "Lucky guess," he muttered, pretending not to care. "You probably memorized that from somewhere." He turned to leave, but something in Aiko's calm smile stopped him. There was something different about her. Something real. She didn't seem proud or desperate to prove herself. She simply knew what she knew, and that confidence unsettled him. For the rest of the day, he couldn't get her out of his mind. How could a maid's daughter write like that? Without training, without schooling, without resources. It was absurd or maybe remarkable. He tried to brush the thought away, but it lingered like an unfinished sentence. Later that evening, as he walked past the empty hall, he saw Aiko again. Sitting on a bench, still writing in her notebook under the yellow corridor lights. Her mother was cleaning a classroom nearby. The professor slowed down, watching quietly from a distance. Aiko was copying words from different languages, some in French, others in Mandarin, even Arabic. She whispered each one softly, practicing the accent with delicate care. For the first time, Professor Ellis didn't see a maid's daughter. He saw a spark of brilliance, the kind that couldn't be taught in any classroom. And though he would never admit it, he felt something rare inside him, admiration mixed with guilt. That night, as he prepared his lectures, he found himself wondering about her again. Who was this girl? How many languages did she actually know? And what if she was more gifted than anyone he'd ever met? Professor Ellis didn't know it yet, but this quiet, humble girl sitting outside his office would soon turn his entire world upside down and teach him a lesson no book ever could. The next morning at the university, Professor Ellis arrived early as usual, holding a pile of papers and a steaming cup of coffee. His mind was still troubled by what had happened the day before. He tried to focus on his work, but the image of the maid's daughter, Aiko, writing perfect Japanese, kept flashing in his thoughts. How could a girl with no formal education, no exposure to language scholars, write like that? It made no sense to him. He told himself it was a lucky guess, but deep down he knew it wasn't. There was something truly special about her. That day, Mrs. Hannah came again to clean his office. As always, Aiko waited quietly in the hallway, holding her worn-out notebook. She didn't talk to anyone. She just sat by the window, reading and writing. Some students passing by whispered and pointed at her, wondering why a maid's daughter spent so much time in the university corridors. A few even laughed, calling her names, but Aiko never reacted. She simply turned the page and kept reading. When Professor Ellis stepped out of his office, he noticed her again. Something inside him urged him to speak to her. He tried to ignore it at first, but his curiosity was too strong. "You again," he said, walking over. "Still writing?" Aiko looked up politely. "Yes, sir," she said. He looked at the notebook in her lap. "May I see?" She hesitated, then handed it to him. The notebook was filled with neat handwriting, rows of words in different languages: English, Japanese, Korean, French, even Arabic. There were small notes in the margins like different pronunciation, used in daily speech, and same meaning but formal tone. Professor Ellis flipped through the pages slowly, growing more surprised with every line. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked again. Aiko smiled shyly. "I like learning words. Each one feels like a friend." Her answer was so innocent yet so deep that it caught him off guard. He didn't know what to say. For a moment, he felt foolish for thinking of her as just a maid's daughter, but his pride still held him back. He cleared his throat and said in a serious tone, "Words are not friends, young lady. They are tools. Tools for knowledge and power." Aiko tilted her head slightly. "Maybe," she said softly, "but tools can build bridges too." That single sentence struck him. There was a wisdom in her words that he hadn't expected from a child. It was something that reminded him of his younger self. Curious, passionate, and unafraid to dream. "Tell me," he said, testing her. "How many languages do you think you know?" Aiko thought for a moment. "I can read and write in 9, she said carefully. "But I'm still learning how to speak some of them properly." The professor almost dropped the notebook. 9? He repeated, his eyes wide. 9 languages? Aiko nodded humbly. "Yes, sir." The students nearby had overheard her words and started whispering among themselves. Some laughed, thinking she was lying. 9 languages? She must be joking, one boy said under his breath. But Aiko stayed calm. She didn't need to defend herself. The truth was enough. Professor Ellis frowned. "If you're telling the truth," he said slowly, "then prove it." Aiko blinked, unsure what he meant. He turned toward his students. "Bring me a piece of paper," he said firmly. One of them quickly handed him a sheet. He took a pen and wrote a short paragraph in French. "Translate this," he ordered. Aiko read it silently, then wrote the full translation in English, perfectly accurate, even correcting a small grammatical error the professor had missed. His eyebrows lifted. He switched to German. She translated again, flawlessly, then to Mandarin, then to Italian. Each time, she didn't hesitate. Her mind seemed to flow between languages like water. Smooth, natural, effortless. By now, the small crowd in the hallway had grown. Students peeked around corners, whispering in disbelief. Mrs. Hannah stood at the end of the corridor, watching nervously, unsure if her daughter was in trouble. Finally, the professor spoke in Japanese. "Tell me, Aiko," he said, "how did you learn all this?" Without missing a beat, she replied in perfect Japanese. "I learned because I love it. When my mother cleans classrooms, I read old books or listened to recordings the students throw away. I don't have money for classes, so I teach myself." Her tone was calm, her pronunciation flawless. The professor understood every word, but his heart struggled to accept what he was hearing. He had spent years studying languages in the best universities, under the best mentors. And here was a maid's daughter, who had learned them all on her own, just by listening, reading, and loving the sound of words. For the first time in years, Professor Ellis felt something new: humility. He realized how small his pride looked next to her determination. She didn't have fancy resources or a famous teacher. She had something much stronger: passion. The hallway was silent. Even the students who had laughed earlier were now staring at her in awe. They couldn't believe what they'd just witnessed. Professor Ellis finally spoke, his voice quieter now. "You have a gift," he said slowly. "A rare one." Aiko looked at him and smiled gently. "Everyone has a gift, sir. They just need someone to believe in it." The words hit him harder than any lecture or research paper ever could. He didn't respond right away. He simply nodded, returning the notebook to her. "Keep studying," he said after a moment, "and never stop learning." As he walked back to his office, his steps were slower, his mind filled with thoughts he couldn't ignore. That day, something inside him began to change. The arrogant professor who once believed knowledge belonged only to the elite had just met a girl who proved that true brilliance needs no title, no wealth, and no permission, only passion. The next day, the story about the maid's daughter who could speak 9 languages had spread all over the university. Students whispered about her in the hallways, professors discussed her in the staff room, and everyone wanted to see if the rumors were true. Some thought it was exaggerated, that she had just memorized a few sentences to impress the professor. Others believed she was a true genius. But no one was more curious than Professor Ellis himself. He couldn't stop thinking about her calm face, her flawless writing, and her quiet confidence. That morning, as he entered his classroom, he noticed Aiko waiting outside again while her mother cleaned. The professor paused by the door and called her in. "Aiko, come here," he said. The students looked at each other, surprised. No one had ever seen him speak kindly to anyone, let alone a maid's daughter. Aiko stood up nervously and stepped inside the classroom. She held her notebook close to her chest, her eyes focused on the floor. "Yes, sir?" she said softly. Professor Ellis smiled faintly, though it was the kind of smile people wear when they're trying to hide excitement. "Yesterday you surprised me," he said, "but I want to know how much you truly know." The class was instantly quiet. Everyone watched as the professor wrote a complicated English paragraph on the board, filled with idioms and cultural expressions that even his university students sometimes struggled to understand. "Translate this into Japanese," he said, handing her a piece of chalk. Aiko took a deep breath and stepped forward. The chalk felt cold in her fingers, but her hands didn't shake. She studied the paragraph carefully, then began writing in neat, graceful Japanese characters. Every word she wrote matched the meaning perfectly. When she finished, she stepped back quietly. The professor read her translation. His eyes widened slightly. It wasn't just correct, it was perfect. She hadn't simply translated the words. She had captured the meaning, the emotion, and even the subtle humor hidden in the text. Only someone who deeply understood both cultures could do that. He looked at her for a moment, speechless. "Impressive," he muttered. The students whispered among themselves, clearly amazed. Some of them even clapped quietly. But the professor wasn't done yet. "Let's try something harder," he said. testing her again. He switched to French this time and spoke an entire sentence aloud. La connaissance est comme un rivière. Elle coule seulement quand on la partage. It meant, knowledge is like a river. It flows only when shared. Aiko smiled slightly. Knowledge is like a river, she said fluently in French, repeating the sentence word for word, her pronunciation soft but accurate. Then, to everyone's shock, she continued speaking, expanding the metaphor in French, adding her own beautiful thoughts. The words flowed like music. The classroom fell silent. No one had ever heard something so graceful come from someone so young. The professor felt a strange warmth in his chest. He realized he wasn't just looking at a talented girl, he was looking at someone extraordinary. To test her further, he switched to another language, German, then Mandarin, and then Spanish. Every time, Aiko responded perfectly, her tone and pronunciation flawless. She didn't hesitate once. It was as if each language was a melody she already knew by heart. Finally, the professor lowered the chalk and said, "Who taught you all this, Aiko?" She looked up, her eyes calm but full of emotion. "No one, sir," she said softly. "When my mother cleans the classrooms, I wait for her. I listen to the students talk. I read the books they leave behind, and sometimes I use the old computers in the library when no one's there. That's how I learn." The professor's chest tightened. He couldn't believe it. All his years of formal training, all his degrees and research, and here was a girl who had learned it all by pure curiosity and determination. A student raised his hand timidly. "Sir, does that mean she knows more than us?" Professor Ellis didn't answer right away. He looked at Aiko, then at his class. "It means," he said slowly, "that intelligence doesn't depend on where you come from. It depends on how much you're willing to learn." Aiko lowered her eyes humbly. She didn't seem proud of what she had done. She was just happy to share what she loved. That made the moment even more powerful. After the class ended, the professor asked her to stay for a moment. "Aiko," he said, "you have an incredible gift. You remind me why I fell in love with languages in the first place. They connect us, no matter who we are or where we come from." Aiko smiled softly. "That's what I feel too," she said. "When I learn a new language, I feel like I'm hearing another part of the world's heart." Those words touched him deeply. For years, Professor Ellis had taught languages like they were academic trophies, something to master, to display, to measure intelligence. But for Aiko, language wasn't about pride. It was about connection, about empathy, about understanding people. As she left the classroom, the professor watched her go, feeling a strange sense of humility. He realized that he, the great linguist, had just been taught one of the most profound lessons of his career. Not by a scholar or a fellow professor, but by a maid's daughter with a notebook full of dreams. That evening, when he sat alone in his office, he opened one of his old Japanese books. For the first time in many years, he didn't read to teach. He read to feel. He thought about Aiko's words and the spark in her eyes when she spoke about languages. In that quiet moment, Professor Ellis understood something he had never truly realized before. Knowledge without heart was empty. And sometimes, true wisdom came from the most unexpected places. Professor Ellis couldn't stop thinking about Aiko. Each time he looked at his books, her calm face appeared in his mind. The way she spoke those foreign words, the way she understood their meaning, it all felt unreal. He had spent his entire life teaching students from the best families. Yet none of them had her natural gift. It was like she carried a world of languages inside her. He felt both amazed and humbled. The next morning, he decided to call Aiko again. When Mrs. Hannah entered to clean his office, he politely asked, "Could your daughter come in for a few minutes?" Mrs. Hannah looked worried. "Sir, did she do something wrong?" she asked nervously, wiping her hands on her apron. Professor Ellis smiled gently, something he rarely did. "No, not at all. She did something right," he said. Aiko stepped into the office, her small notebook clutched in her hands as always. "Good morning, sir," she said politely. He gestured for her to sit down. "Aiko, I have a few questions," he said. "You told me you learned all these languages by yourself. How is that possible? You've never taken formal lessons, have you?" She shook her head. No, sir. I just listen and read. When my mother cleans classrooms, I sit in the corner and read whatever books I can find. Sometimes I copy words into my notebook. Later, I try to pronounce them. If I can't, I listen to videos online or recordings left in the language lab. The professor leaned forward, fascinated. You mean you study while your mother works? Yes, she said simply. I like being near her, but I also love learning. I want to understand how people think in different parts of the world. Her words struck him deeply. Most of his students learned languages to get better jobs or higher grades, but Aiko wanted to understand people. That, he realized, was the true heart of language. He decided to test her again, but this time with more complexity. He opened his drawer and took out a paper filled with sentences written in 5 different languages: French, Mandarin, German, Arabic, and Spanish. Let's see if you can read these aloud, he said. Aiko nodded and began. Her pronunciation was gentle but accurate, her voice flowing from one language to another like a melody. She didn't stumble, didn't pause to think. It was as if she had grown up speaking all of them. When she finished, the professor sat back in his chair, completely astonished. Do you know what this means, Aiko? He asked quietly. She tilted her head slightly. That I really like learning? She replied with a shy smile. He laughed softly. More than that. It means you have a rare gift. Some people study for years and still can't do what you just did. You are special. Her cheeks turned pink. Thank you, sir. But I don't feel special. I just love words. They make me happy. At that moment, Mrs. Hannah walked in, carrying a cleaning cart. She stopped when she saw her daughter sitting in the professor's chair, talking confidently in multiple languages. She froze, not sure if she was interrupting something important. Professor Ellis turned to her and smiled kindly. Mrs. Hannah, your daughter is incredibly talented. Do you know she can speak and write in 9 languages? The maid's eyes widened. 9? Oh no, sir, that can't be true. She only studies on her own. We can't afford lessons. It's true, he said warmly. She's remarkable. You should be very proud. Mrs. Hannah's eyes filled with tears. She had always known her daughter was bright, but hearing it from someone like Professor Ellis felt unbelievable. Thank you, sir, she whispered, her voice shaking. She works very hard. Aiko stood up and hugged her mother gently. It's because of you, Mama, she said softly. You always told me to never stop learning. Professor Ellis watched them silently. Something in that small moment touched him deeply. He had spent his whole life chasing academic excellence, but in front of him stood the true meaning of education: love, passion, and perseverance. He cleared his throat and said, Aiko, would you like to learn more? Formally? I could help you. You deserve proper guidance. Aiko looked shocked. You would teach me? He nodded. If you're willing to work hard, I'll make time for you. After classes, you can come here. We'll study together. Her eyes sparkled with excitement. Yes, sir. I'd love that. From that day on, Aiko began meeting Professor Ellis after his lectures. He gave her access to university materials, old research papers, and even his personal notes. What amazed him the most was how quickly she learned. She didn't just memorize words. She understood them. She could explain how culture influenced language, how emotions shaped communication, and how even silence carried meaning. Sometimes, the professor would ask her opinion on things just to see how her mind worked. And every time, her answers surprised him. It was like watching a flower bloom in fast motion. Beautiful, pure, and unstoppable. One afternoon, as they studied together, the professor leaned back in his chair and said, You know, Aiko, when I first met you, I thought you were just an ordinary girl waiting for her mother. But now I see I was blind. You have something even I can't teach, heart. Aiko smiled shyly. You teach me a lot too, sir. You help me believe that even someone like me can dream big. He felt a lump in his throat. For years, he had looked down on people like her, people from simple backgrounds. But now he realized something important. True intelligence doesn't wear expensive clothes or sit in fancy classrooms. It can shine even in the quietest corners of the world. As the sun set outside the window, Professor Ellis closed his book and looked at Aiko. He knew, deep down, that this meeting was no accident. Maybe fate had brought her into his life to remind him that knowledge wasn't about pride or power. It was about sharing, growing, and believing in others. And from that day forward, his lessons were never the same again. Weeks passed, and Aiko's lessons with Professor Ellis became a regular routine. Every evening after his classes ended, she would quietly enter his office, carrying her worn-out notebook and an old pen. Her mother would wait outside, finishing her cleaning duties, while Aiko sat across from the professor, eager to learn. The once cold and serious man now looked forward to these moments more than anything else. Teaching her didn't feel like teaching at all. It felt like discovering something new every single day. One rainy afternoon, as the sound of raindrops echoed against the windows, Professor Ellis placed a new test on the desk. "Aiko," he said, smiling slightly. "Today, I want to see how much you've improved." She nodded, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "I'll try my best, sir." He handed her a paper that contained difficult sentences in different languages: Japanese, German, French, Mandarin, and Arabic. Some of the phrases were rare idioms even his university students found confusing. He leaned back, watching her silently. Most students would have panicked at such a test, but Aiko looked calm, confident, and full of quiet focus. She read each sentence carefully and began writing the meanings with precision. Her translations weren't just word for word. She captured the emotion and rhythm of each phrase, making them sound alive. It was as if she understood the heart behind every language. When she finished, Professor Ellis checked her work line by line. His eyes widened in disbelief. Everything was perfect, no mistakes, no hesitation. "Aiko," he said softly, "you did it again. You got them all right." She smiled humbly. "Thank you, sir. I just love understanding what words truly mean. It feels like they tell stories of people I've never met." He nodded slowly, deeply moved. Her words carried more wisdom than most adults he knew. For years, he had studied languages as tools of intellect and status. But Aiko saw them as connections, bridges between hearts. That difference made her extraordinary. Curious to know more, he asked, "Do you ever get tired of studying so many languages?" Aiko shook her head. "No, sir. Each language feels like a new window. When I read Japanese, I feel calm, like listening to rain. When I speak French, I feel the beauty of music. When I write Arabic, I feel grace and peace. They all make me feel alive." The professor listened quietly, amazed. Her descriptions were poetic. He realized that she didn't just learn languages. She felt them. That was what made her special. One day, as they studied, another professor from the university stopped by. Professor Grant, a senior linguist who had worked with Ellis for years. "Raymond," he said with his usual serious tone, "the staff is talking about some girl who can speak 9 languages. Surely that's exaggerated, right?" Professor Ellis smiled faintly. "You could see for yourself." Grant laughed. "All right, let's test this little genius." He turned to Aiko, who stood politely. "So, young lady, they say you're a language prodigy. Can you speak French?" Aiko nodded and greeted him in perfect French, with flawless accent and grace. Grant raised his eyebrows, impressed. Not bad. What about Mandarin?" Without hesitation, she switched languages, speaking smoothly and naturally. Her tones were perfect. The older professor was stunned. "And Arabic?" he challenged again. Aiko began reciting a short poem she had learned from an old book her mother had found. Her pronunciation was soft but precise. Every syllable carried meaning. When she finished, silence filled the room. Professor Grant turned to Ellis, whispering, "My God, she's incredible. She's not just memorizing. She understands." Ellis nodded proudly. "Yes, she does. She has something no textbook can teach." Aiko looked down modestly, not sure what to say. Compliments made her shy. After Grant left, Professor Ellis turned to her and said, "You see, even other professors are amazed by you. You have a gift, Aiko, something rare and beautiful. You must never hide it. She looked up slowly. But sir, she said, sometimes people look at me differently when they find out. They think it's strange that a maid's daughter can do this. The professor felt a sharp pain in his chest. He knew she was right. The world often judged people by their background, not their abilities. Aiko, he said gently, it doesn't matter where you come from. What matters is what you carry inside. You've proven that brilliance can come from anywhere. Tears filled Aiko's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. I just want to learn, she whispered. That's all I've ever wanted. Then keep learning, he said firmly, and I'll help you. You deserve every chance the world has to offer. That evening, as she packed her things, Professor Ellis looked at her with deep admiration. He realized something important. Aiko was not just his student. She was his teacher too. Through her, he was rediscovering the beauty of language, the joy of learning, and the importance of humility. Later that week, he shared her story with a few trusted colleagues. Soon, word spread even further. Aiko was invited to demonstrate her language skills before the university's academic board. She was nervous, but the professor encouraged her. Just be yourself, he said. You don't need to impress anyone. Your truth will speak louder than anything else. When the day came, Aiko stood before a room full of professors and scholars. They asked her questions in different languages, and she answered each one calmly, confidently, and perfectly. By the end, everyone applauded. Some even stood up to honor her. In that moment, Mrs. Hannah, who was standing quietly near the door, had tears rolling down her cheeks. She couldn't believe her little girl was standing in front of the very people who once ignored her, now earning their respect and admiration. As for Professor Ellis, he watched proudly from the side. He knew that Aiko's journey was just beginning. She had already done something extraordinary. She had changed the way people looked at intelligence, education, and class. The arrogant man who once believed knowledge belonged only to the privileged now understood that true wisdom could bloom anywhere, even in the heart of a humble maid's daughter who dared to dream. After Aiko's incredible performance at the university, things started to change quickly. Students, teachers, and even the dean began to talk about the maid's daughter who could speak 9 languages. Some admired her, some were curious, and others couldn't believe it was true. But no one could deny what they had seen with their own eyes. Aiko had done something extraordinary. Professor Ellis felt proud but also protective. He knew how cruel the academic world could be. Some people praised talent only until it threatened their own pride. And he was right. Within a few days, whispers began. Some professors accused him of exaggerating her abilities. Others said Aiko must have memorized everything or used tricks to impress the audience. One afternoon, as Aiko came for her usual lesson, she noticed Professor Ellis sitting silently, staring at a letter on his desk. His expression was serious. Is something wrong, sir? She asked gently. He looked up, sighing. Aiko, the board wants you to take a formal evaluation test. They say it's necessary to verify your skills. Her face fell. Do they think I lied? No, he said softly. But they find it hard to believe someone your age and your background could do what you did. Aiko stayed quiet for a moment, her hands trembling slightly. She had worked so hard, not to show off, but simply because she loved languages. Now it felt like her passion was being questioned. Professor Ellis placed his hand on the desk. Don't be afraid. I'll be there with you. You just have to be yourself again. Aiko nodded, though she felt nervous inside. The next morning, she arrived at the university's main hall. It was filled with professors, translators, and even some of the students who had watched her last time. At the center of the room sat a long table stacked with papers, books, and a laptop. The test would cover written translation, oral interpretation, and comprehension in multiple languages. The head examiner, Professor Grant, stood up and said, Miss Aiko, you will translate these paragraphs from Japanese into English, then French into Arabic, and finally, interpret a live conversation in Mandarin. Do you accept? Aiko bowed respectfully. Yes, sir. The room grew silent as she began. Her hands moved quickly, yet gracefully. Her Japanese to English translation was flawless. Then she switched to French, writing elegantly and with feeling. Her transitions were so natural that some examiners exchanged surprised looks. When it came to the Mandarin interpretation, she listened carefully to the audio clip and repeated every word perfectly, her tones crisp and accurate. By the time she finished, there was silence. Then a quiet round of applause began, spreading across the room. Even Professor Grant, who had once doubted her, smiled in admiration. "Remarkable," he said. "This young lady is a true linguist." Tears welled up in Aiko's eyes, but she held them back and bowed again. Professor Ellis smiled proudly. He had never seen such courage and calmness in anyone before. After the test, some of the teachers approached her. One of them said kindly, "Aiko, you have a rare gift. You could easily get a scholarship if you continue your studies here." Aiko's heart skipped a beat. A scholarship? That was something she had never even dreamed of. Her mother was still working long hours to support them. If she could study without worrying about money, it would change their lives forever. Later that day, she ran to tell her mother. Mrs. Hannah listened quietly, her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, my sweet girl," she whispered, holding Aiko close. "You've made me so proud. Your father would have been so happy to see this day." Aiko smiled softly. "Mama, I want to keep studying. I want to learn more languages and maybe even teach someday." Mrs. Hannah nodded, wiping her tears. "You will, my love. You've earned it." But even as their hearts were full of joy, not everyone was pleased. A few jealous students began to spread rumors. They said Aiko had received secret help from Professor Ellis, that she didn't deserve the scholarship, that she was only lucky. One even said, "She's just a maid's daughter pretending to be special." When Aiko heard those words in the hallway, her chest tightened. For the first time, she felt small and hurt. That night, she sat quietly in her tiny room, staring at her notebooks. She began to wonder if she really belonged in that world. The next day, she didn't go to her lesson. Professor Ellis noticed her absence immediately. Concerned, he went to find her. He visited the small staff quarters where the maids lived and knocked gently on their door. Mrs. Hannah opened it, surprised to see him. "Sir?" she said. "I came to see Aiko," he said. "She didn't come to class today." Mrs. Hannah hesitated. "She's not feeling well." Professor Ellis frowned. "Please, may I speak with her?" Aiko appeared behind her mother, her eyes red from crying. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quietly. "Maybe I don't belong in that place after all. People think I'm just pretending." He stepped closer and spoke firmly but kindly. "Aiko, listen to me. The people who doubt you are the ones afraid of your light. You don't need to prove yourself to anyone anymore. You've already shown your greatness." She looked up slowly, tears falling down her cheeks. "But why do they hate me for something I love?" He smiled sadly. "Because not everyone can handle seeing beauty in unexpected places." Those words stayed in her heart. Slowly, her sadness turned into strength. She promised herself that no matter what others said, she would continue learning. The following week, Aiko returned to her lessons stronger than before. Her confidence returned, her smile brighter. The same students who once whispered behind her back now looked at her differently. Even those who doubted her began to respect her determination. And when the dean officially announced her full scholarship, the hall filled with applause. Mrs. Hannah cried openly, and Professor Ellis stood tall beside her, clapping the loudest. Aiko bowed deeply, her heart full of gratitude. She had not only proven her intelligence but also her strength, kindness, and courage. She had faced judgment and turned it into victory. A few months passed since Aiko received her scholarship. Life had completely changed for her and her mother. They no longer had to worry about money, and Aiko could study freely without guilt or fear. She was now officially a student at the same university where she once came only as the maid's daughter. Every morning, she wore her new uniform proudly, her books neatly arranged in her arms, and her heart filled with dreams. But even with all her success, Aiko never forgot who she was or where she came from. She still helped her mother after classes, washing dishes or cleaning a few rooms when she could. "Mama worked so hard for me," she often said. I'll never stop helping her. Her humility touched everyone who met her. Even the professors who once doubted her were now impressed not only by her talent but by her kindness. Professor Ellis especially felt a deep sense of pride every time he saw her in class. She had become the best student he ever taught, and perhaps the most inspiring person he had ever met. However, not everything was peaceful. Jealousy still lived in a few hearts. One student in particular, Mia, couldn't stand seeing Aiko's success. Mia came from a rich family and believed that people like Aiko didn't belong among scholars. She's just pretending, Mia would whisper to others. Soon, everyone will see the truth. One day, Mia decided to embarrass Aiko in front of everyone. During a group presentation in Professor Ellis's linguistics class, Mia raised her hand and said, "Professor, since Aiko is so fluent in so many languages, maybe she can translate this rare old Japanese poem for us. Let's see if she's really as good as everyone says." The class went silent. Everyone looked at Aiko. Even the professor frowned slightly, sensing Mia's intention. But Aiko stood up calmly. "Of course," she said softly. "I'll try." Mia smirked and handed her a small paper with an old Japanese poem written in a traditional style, something even native speakers often struggled with. Aiko took a deep breath, read it quietly, and then began to translate. Her voice was gentle yet confident. As she spoke, her words carried emotion and meaning that went beyond literal translation. She explained the hidden feelings behind the lines, the longing, the sorrow, the beauty of time passing. The class was silent, listening in awe. When she finished, there wasn't a single sound for a few seconds. Then Professor Ellis slowly clapped. "That," he said proudly, "was perfect. You didn't just translate words. You brought the poet's soul to life." The class joined in applause. Mia sat frozen, her face red with embarrassment. Her plan to humiliate Aiko had completely failed. Aiko, however, didn't gloat or look smug. She simply smiled politely and returned to her seat. After class, Mia approached her, looking uncomfortable. I didn't mean to be rude," she said awkwardly. Aiko smiled kindly. "It's all right. Sometimes we just need a chance to understand each other." That simple reply melted the last bit of anger in Mia's heart. From that day, she began to respect Aiko and even asked her for help with her Japanese homework. Aiko agreed without hesitation. Soon, Aiko's kindness and talent made her one of the most beloved students on campus. She started tutoring other students who struggled with languages, helping them patiently after class. Some called her the miracle girl, but she always corrected them gently, saying, "I'm not a miracle. I just love learning." One afternoon, Professor Ellis invited Aiko to his office. On his desk was a letter stamped with an international seal. "Aiko," he said, smiling, "this came today. It's from a language research institute in Tokyo. They saw your translation performance online and want you to attend a youth linguistics conference next month." Her eyes widened. "Tokyo? They want me to go there?" "Yes," he said proudly. "They've offered to pay for your travel and stay. You'll represent the university and yourself." Aiko covered her mouth in disbelief. "Oh my, sir. This is incredible." Mrs. Hannah cried tears of joy when she heard the news. "You're going to Japan, my dear, the land where your father was born. He would be so proud of you." Aiko nodded with emotion. Her late father had been Japanese, and she had always felt a deep connection to his culture through the language. This trip meant more to her than just a conference. It was a journey to her roots. When the day came, Professor Ellis accompanied her to the airport. "Remember," he said, handing her a small notebook, "this isn't just about showing your talent. It's about sharing your heart through language. Speak with honesty, and people will listen." She smiled warmly. "Thank you for everything, sir. I wouldn't be here without your guidance." He shook his head. "No, Aiko, you did this yourself. You just needed someone to remind you that you could." As the plane took off, Aiko looked out the window, thinking about everything that had happened. The days when she used to quietly clean classrooms, the humiliation she faced, the kindness of her professor, and the faith of her mother. All of it led her to this moment. When she arrived in Tokyo, she was amazed by the tall buildings, the bright lights, and the beautiful mix of tradition and modern life. At the conference, she met young scholars from all over the world. Many of them were shocked to learn her story, that a maid's daughter could speak 9 languages fluently and earn international recognition. When it was her turn to speak on stage, Aiko looked around the hall, took a deep breath, and began. She talked about how languages had taught her compassion, understanding, and respect. She said, "Every language carries a piece of someone's heart. When we learn them, we learn to listen not just to words but to people." The audience gave her a standing ovation. Cameras flashed, and her name began to spread across news outlets and social media. But even as applause filled the room, Aiko stayed humble. She smiled softly, thinking, "This is not the end. It's just the beginning." When she returned home, her mother and Professor Ellis were waiting for her at the airport. She ran to them, tears in her eyes, saying, "I did it." Her mother hugged her tightly. "No, my love. You earned it." Professor Ellis smiled proudly. He had always believed in her, but now the whole world did too. And deep down, Aiko knew that her journey was no longer about proving herself. It was about using her gift to inspire others who felt unseen or unworthy, just as she once did. Months passed since Aiko returned from Tokyo, but her life was no longer the same. The conference had made her name known far beyond the university. Newspapers and blogs had written about the maid's daughter who spoke 9 languages. Her story touched hearts all over the world. People admired her courage, her kindness, and her humility. But to Aiko, fame didn't matter. She still lived the same simple life, waking up early, studying hard, and helping her mother. The only difference was that now she carried a quiet confidence, a light that couldn't be dimmed by anyone's doubt or judgment. One morning, Professor Ellis invited her to his office. "Aiko," he said with a proud smile, "I received a letter from the Ministry of Education. They want to meet you." Aiko's eyes widened. "Me? Why would they want to meet me?" "They've read about your story," he explained. "They want to discuss a special scholarship, one that would allow you to study abroad for higher education. You'd represent not just the university, but the entire country." Her heart started to race. Study abroad? It sounded like a dream too big for her to even imagine. "But, sir, do you think I can do that? I've never even left home before," she said softly. Professor Ellis smiled. "You've already done what most people only dream of, Aiko. You've proved that talent has no class, no title, and no limits. You belong wherever your heart wants to go." She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with emotion. "If I go, I'll make sure I make you proud, sir. And Mama too." The next week, she and her mother were invited to a grand ceremony at the university auditorium. The place was decorated with banners, and almost every teacher, student, and official had gathered to witness the event. Aiko stood nervously backstage, clutching her notes, her heart pounding fast. She still couldn't believe that a girl who once mopped floors was now being honored on stage. When her name was announced, the crowd clapped loudly. She stepped onto the stage, dressed in a simple white dress her mother had carefully ironed the night before. The dean smiled warmly and handed her a gold medal and a certificate. "Aiko Hana," he said proudly, "you have reminded us that true intelligence is not born from privilege but from passion and perseverance. You have made this institution proud, and today, we honor you." The audience stood up and clapped. Tears filled Mrs. Hannah's eyes as she watched her daughter bow gracefully. It was the proudest moment of her life. After the applause settled, Aiko stepped forward to speak. She looked around the hall, at the professors who once doubted her, the students who once mocked her, and the mother who had always believed in her, and then she began. "When I first came to this university," she said softly, "I was invisible. I was just the maid's daughter, someone people didn't notice or care about. But one day, someone gave me a chance to learn, to prove myself, to dream." She looked at Professor Ellis, who smiled back proudly. "I learned that education isn't about showing how smart you are," she continued. It's about understanding people, respecting differences, and using what you learn to make the world kinder. Every language I learned taught me that no matter where we come from, we all want the same things: love, respect, and a voice. Her words touched everyone. Even those who once looked down on her now felt a deep sense of shame and admiration. After the ceremony, reporters surrounded her, asking questions about her future plans. Aiko answered politely, "I want to study more languages and become a translator or teacher. I want to help children like me, those who are told they're not good enough, find their voice." That night, she and her mother walked home under the stars. Mrs. Hannah held her daughter's hand tightly. "You did it, my little girl," she whispered. "Your father is smiling from the heavens." Aiko smiled softly. "Mama, do you know what's strange? I don't feel like I did it alone. You were always with me, every word, every step." Her mother wiped her tears and kissed her forehead. "And I always will be." Weeks later, Aiko received an official letter confirming her full scholarship to study linguistics at a famous university in France. She couldn't believe it. The same girl who once studied in secret, using old books, was now going to study among world scholars. Before leaving, she visited Professor Ellis one last time. His office looked the same. Piles of books everywhere, papers scattered on the desk, and that same old wooden chair. But this time, she wasn't there as his student. She was there as someone whose journey had come full circle. "Sir," she said softly, "thank you for believing in me when no one else did." He smiled gently. "Aiko, I didn't give you your gift. I just helped you see it. Promise me one thing wherever you go: never forget the power of humility. Knowledge means nothing without kindness." "I promise," she said, bowing deeply. As she turned to leave, he stopped her. "And Aiko," he said warmly, "remember, you taught me too. You reminded me that real learning never ends." She smiled and left, feeling the weight of his words settle in her heart. The day she boarded the plane, Mrs. Hannah stood by her side, holding her hand tightly. "Go, my love," she whispered. "The world is waiting to hear your voice." Aiko hugged her mother one last time before walking toward the gate. As she looked back, she saw her mother waving, her eyes filled with tears and pride. When the plane took off, Aiko looked out of the window, the clouds glowing beneath her. She thought of her mother, her late father, and Professor Ellis, and she whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." From that day on, Aiko's story became an inspiration for many. Schools began sharing her journey, reminding students that greatness doesn't come from wealth or background, but from courage, love, and perseverance. And somewhere in a quiet classroom, another young girl, poor, shy, and full of dreams, picked up a book, remembering Aiko's story, and whispered, "If she could do it, maybe I can too." Aiko's legacy wasn't written in gold or fame. It was written in hearts, a story of how a humble maid's daughter, armed with nothing but determination and kindness, taught the world the true meaning of brilliance.